David had been working nights at the old highway diner for 3 months now. It wasn't the job he dreamed about, but it paid the bills and gave him time to think. Most nights were pretty quiet, just truck drivers grabbing coffee and the occasional lost traveler asking for directions. Tuesday night started like any other. Rain was hitting the windows hard, making everything outside look blurry and dark. The clock on the wall showed 2:47 a.m. when the little bell above the door made its familiar sound. David looked up from wiping down the counter, expecting to see another tired driver. Instead, he saw her. She moved differently than other people. Not in a weird way, but like she was floating just a tiny bit above the ground. Her skin was pale, almost like moonlight, and when she looked around the diner, her eyes seemed to take in everything at once. David had worked in customer service, long enough to read people pretty well, but this woman, she was like trying to read a book written in a language he'd never seen before. She picked the corner booth, the one where the light flickered on and off every few minutes. David had been meaning to ask his boss to fix it, but somehow it never seemed important until now. He grabbed the coffee pot and walked over, trying to act normal even though something about her made his heart beat a little faster. "Can I get you some coffee?" he asked, holding up the pot. She looked up at him, and for a second David forgot how to breathe. Her eyes weren't just blue or green or brown. They seemed to change color depending on how the light hit them.
Ow.
They looked old. Not like she was old, because she couldn't have been more than 25. But like she'd seen things that would take most people a lifetime to understand. "Yes, please," she said, and her voice had this musical quality to it. "Black coffee. And do you have pie? Apple or cherry?" David asked, pouring the coffee into her cup. His hands were steady, but inside he felt like everything was shaking. "What?" "Please." Her accent was strange. Not foreign exactly, but like English wasn't the first language she'd learned, even though she spoke it perfectly. David brought her the pie and tried not to stare as he set it down. Up close, he could see that. Her skin actually seemed to have this faint shimmer to it, like she was covered in the finest glitter imaginable. "Thank you," she said. And when their fingers accidentally touched as he handed her the fork, David felt something like electricity run up his arm. He went back to his cleaning and found himself looking over at her every few minutes. She ate, slowly, like she was thinking about each bite. Sometimes she would stare out the window at the rain. David could swear he saw her lips, moving like she was having a conversation with someone who wasn't there. The diner was completely empty, except for them. Even the highway outside was quiet. No trucks, no cars, just the sound of rain and the hum of the old refrigerator behind the counter. David had always liked the quiet of the night shift, but tonight it felt different. World had stopped just for this moment, just for them at one point. She pulled out what looked like a phone, but it was too thin and too shiny to be any phone David had ever seen. She stared at it for a long time, and David watched her face change from curious to worried to something that looked like fear. She put the device away quickly when she noticed him looking. "More coffee?" David asked, walking back over with the pot. "Please," she said, but her voice sounded different now, smaller somehow. As he poured, David noticed her hands were shaking, not just a little tremor from too much caffeine, but real shaking, like she was fighting to keep control of something big and scary inside her. "You okay?" he asked gently, setting the pot down on the table. She looked up at him again. This time David could see tears gathering in those impossible eyes. Double quotes she started, then stopped. "I don't know." David had seen plenty of people have bad nights. In his 3 months at the diner, truck drivers missing their families, travelers who'd lost their way, people running from things they didn't want to talk about. But this felt different. This felt like watching someone's whole world fall apart. "Want to talk about it?" he offered, sliding into the seat across from her. His boss probably wouldn't like him sitting with customers, but his boss wasn't here. And this woman looked like she needed someone to care. She stared at him for a long moment, like she was trying to decide if she could trust him. Finally, she shook her head. "You wouldn't believe me. Try me," David said. "I've heard some pretty crazy stories working nights." But before she could answer, she reached for her coffee cup with those shaking hands. Her fingers slipped, and the fork fell from the table, hitting the floor with a loud clang that seemed to echo through the empty diner. That tiny sound broke something inside her. The tears that had been gathering in her eyes suddenly spilled over, and she made this small, broken sound that went straight to David's heart. Without thinking, he moved around to her side of the booth and sat down next to her. "Hey," he said, softly, "it's okay. Whatever it is, it's going to be okay." But as she turned toward him, David realized that whatever was making this strange, beautiful woman cry, it was probably bigger than anything he'd ever tried to fix before. David reached down and picked up the fork from the floor. It was just a simple piece of silverware, nothing special about it at all. But when he looked back at the woman, she was staring at it, like it had somehow broken her heart. "Here," he said, gently offering her a clean fork from the table setting. "Don't worry about it. Things fall sometimes." But she wasn't looking at the fork anymore. She was looking at him, and the tears in her eyes were flowing freely now. Not the angry kind of crying David had seen from upset customers, or even the sad kind from people who'd had too much to drink. This was something else entirely. This was the kind of crying that came from somewhere so deep inside a person that it seemed to carry the weight of the entire universe. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I just ... She couldn't finish the sentence. Instead, she wrapped her arms around herself and started to shake. David had never felt so helpless in his life. Here was this beautiful, mysterious woman falling apart right in front of him, and he had no idea what to do about it. Hey, he said softly, moving closer to her on the booth seat. "You don't have to apologize for anything. Whatever's wrong, we can figure it out, okay?" But his words seemed to make it worse. She made this sound not quite a sob, not quite. A sigh that sounded like music if music could be heartbroken. It was the most beautiful and saddest sound David had ever heard. Without really thinking about it, David put his arm around her shoulders. He half expected her to pull away, to tell him not to touch her, but instead she seemed to melt into him. She turned toward him and buried her face in his shoulder, and David found himself holding a crying stranger at 3 a.m. in an empty diner while rain drummed against the windows. She felt different in his arms. Not bad different, just ... different. Like she was made of something lighter than other people, but somehow more solid at the same time. Her hair smelled like starlight, if starlight had a smell. David knew that was a crazy thought, but it was the only way he could describe it. "It's okay," he murmured, running his hand gently over her hair. "Whatever it is, it's going to be okay. You're safe here." She cried against his shoulder for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes. Her tears soaked through his work shirt, but David didn't care. He'd never held anyone who needed comfort as much as she seemed to need it right now. Finally, her breathing started to slow down. She pulled back just enough to look at him, and David could see that her eyes were red from crying, but somehow still. The most beautiful eyes he'd ever seen. "I'm sorry," she said again. I'm not supposed to. ... You're not supposed to what?" David asked gently. "Cry. Everyone cries sometimes." She shook her head. "You don't understand. I'm not supposed to feel this way. Any of this. I was trained better than this." "Trained for what?" She looked away, staring out the window at the rain. "To not get attached. To observe without getting involved. To remember that I'm just here to watch and learn, not to..." Gestured helplessly between them. "Not to care." David felt like he was missing half of a conversation, but he could hear the pain in her voice. "Who trained you? What kind of job do you have?" "It's the kind where caring about people gets you in trouble," she said quietly. "It's the kind where having feelings is considered a failure. That sounds like a terrible job." She laughed, but it wasn't. A happy sound. "It's the only job I've ever known. It's what I was born to do. But tonight... She looked at him again, and David could see something different in her eyes now. Not just sadness, but fear. "Tonight I got a message. My time here is almost over. Tomorrow I have to go back." "Go back where?" "Home," she said, but the way she said it made it sound like the last place in the universe she wanted to be. David felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd known this woman for less than an hour, but the thought of her leaving felt wrong somehow. Like the world would be a little less bright without her in it. "Maybe you don't have to go," he said. Maybe you could stay here instead." She smiled at him then, and even though it was a sad smile, it was the most beautiful thing David had ever seen. "You're sweet," she said, "but you don't understand what you're saying. If I don't go back, they'll come looking for me. And when they find me," she shivered, and David tightened his arms around her. "When they find you? What?" he asked. She was quiet for a long moment, like she was trying to decide how much to tell him. Finally, she looked straight into his eyes and said, "David, what? Would you say if I told you that everything you think you know about the world is only a tiny piece of a much bigger picture?" David blinked. He hadn't told her his name. His name tag was tucked under his apron, and he was sure he hadn't introduced himself. "How do you know my name?" "Because," she said quietly, "I've been watching you for weeks." David stared at her, trying to process what she'd just said. "You've been watching me? For weeks?" He should have felt scared or angry. Any normal person would have. But looking into her eyes, all David felt was curiosity. There was something about her that made him trust her, even when she was saying things that should have sent him running. "I know how that sounds," she said quickly, seeing the confusion on his face. "But it's not what you think. I wasn't stalking you or anything like that. It was my job." "Your job is to watch people." She nodded slowly. "To watch, to learn, to understand. I've been studying this town, the people in it. You, the way you treat customers who are rude to you with kindness anyway. Mrs. Chen comes in every Thursday and tells you the same stories about her grandchildren. You listen like it's the first time you're hearing them. Tommy, the truck driver, who stops here twice a week and always orders the same thing. And you remember exactly how he likes his coffee." David's head was spinning. She knew about Mrs. Chen and Tommy. She'd been watching him interact with his regular customers. "I don't understand. Why me? Why any of us? 'Cause you're all so... ... She paused, like she was searching for the right word. "Human, you care about each other in ways that seem impossible to my people. You form connections that serve no logical purpose, yet they mean everything to you, your people." David asked. "What do you mean, your people?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her hands. When she looked up at him again, her eyes held a kind of sadness that seemed older than the stars. "David," she said softly, "what if I told you that your planet isn't alone in the universe? There are others out there watching, learning, trying to understand what makes humanity so special." For a second, David thought she might be having some kind of breakdown. But then he remembered the way she moved, the shimmer of her skin, the device that looked like no phone he'd ever seen. He remembered the way her touch felt electric and how her tears had sounded like music. "You're telling me you're from another planet?" he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm telling you, I'm from very far away," she replied. "Farther than you can imagine. And I was sent here to study your species, to understand how you work, how you think, how you feel." David should have laughed. He should have thought she was crazy. But instead he found himself nodding. "Okay," he said. "That actually explains a lot." She looked surprised. "You believe me?" "I don't know why, but yeah, I do." David shifted in the booth so he could face her better. "What?" "Name." "My name is..." "Well, you couldn't pronounce it with human vocal cords, but the closest thing in your language would be Lyra." "Lyra," David repeated. "Like the constellation." "Exactly like the constellation," she said, and for the first time since she'd started crying, she almost smiled. "You know astronomy?" "I like looking at the stars sometimes, when the night shift gets quiet." David paused. "So you came here from space to study us? How long have you been here?" 6 months in your time," Lyra said. "I was supposed to observe for one of your years, then return home with my report, but something went wrong." "What went wrong?" Lyra looked away again, fresh tears starting to gather in her eyes. "I started to feel things, real things, my people. We evolved past emotions a long time ago. We see them as primitive, unnecessary. We observe them in other species the way you might observe ants building a hill. But you're crying," David pointed out gently. "You've got emotions now. That's the problem," she whispered. The longer I stayed here, the more I started to understand what I was watching. It wasn't just behavior to be cataloged. It was life. Real, messy, beautiful life. And somehow, I started to become part of it. David reached out and took her hand. Her skin was warm, but it still had that faint electric feeling. Is that why you're upset? Because you're feeling things? I'm upset because today I received a message from my people. My time here is ending. Tomorrow night, they're coming to take me home. And you don't want to go? Lyra looked straight into his eyes, and David could see everything she was feeling reflected there. Fear, sadness, and something else. Something that made his heart race. David, I've spent weeks watching you be kind to everyone who walks through that door. I've seen you give free coffee to people who couldn't pay. Stay late to help close the kitchen, even when it's not your job, and treat every person like they matter. I've watched you, and somewhere along the way, I stopped just observing. It happened instead? I fell in love, she said quietly. With this place, with humanity, with the beautiful chaos of caring about things that might hurt you. And I fell in love with you. David felt like the air had been knocked out of his lungs. This amazing, impossible woman had just told him she loved him. But before he could respond, she continued. When I go back tomorrow, they'll remove these feelings from me. They'll take away everything I've learned to feel and leave me with just the data. I'll remember the facts about humans, but I won't remember what it felt like to be one of you. I won't remember what it felt like to love you. Then don't go, David said, the words coming out before he could stop them. Lyra shook her head. You don't understand. If I don't return, they'll send others to find me. They'll erase the memories of everyone I've had contact with to protect their secret. You'd forget me anyway, David. At least this way, you'll keep the memory of tonight. David felt like the world had just turned upside down. Here was this incredible woman telling him she loved him, and in the same breath explaining why they could never be together. It was like being handed the most beautiful gift in the universe, only to watch it slip through his fingers. There has to be another way, he said, gripping her hand tighter. There's always another way. Lyra smiled sadly. You sound so much like the humans I've been studying. Always believing that love can conquer everything. It's one of the things that makes your species so remarkable. Maybe it can, David said. Maybe love really is that powerful. My people have been traveling between stars for thousands of years, Lyra explained. They've seen civilizations rise and fall, watched species evolve and go extinct. To them, emotions are just chemical reactions that get in the way of clear thinking. What I'm feeling right now, they'd call it a contamination. David couldn't believe what he was hearing. A contamination? You're talking about love like it's some kind of disease? To my people, it is, she said. We evolved past the need for individual connections because they were seen as weaknesses. When everyone thinks and feels the same way, there's no conflict, no pain, no heartbreak. But also no joy, no surprise, no love, David finished. Exactly. Lyra wiped away fresh tears. For 6 months I've been learning what it means to feel happiness when I see a child laugh, or sadness when I watch someone say goodbye. I've experienced wonder at your sunsets, amazement at how you create art and music just because it's beautiful, and I've felt my heart race every time I watched you through the diner windows. You really have been watching me for weeks, David said. Every Tuesday and Friday night, she admitted. I told myself it was research. I needed to understand how humans form bonds, how they care for each other. But the truth is, I kept coming back because watching you made me feel something I'd never experienced before. What did it make you feel? Save, she said simply. It's like maybe the universe wasn't as cold and empty as my people believe it is. It's like maybe there really is something magical about caring for someone else more than you care. For yourself? David looked around the empty diner. The rain was still coming down outside, and the clock on the wall now showed almost 4 in the morning. In a few hours, the morning shift would arrive, and the world would wake up and go about its normal business. But nothing would ever be normal for him again. Tell me about your home, he said. What's it like? Lyra's expression grew distant. Beautiful in its own way. cities that float between stars, technology that can reshape matter with a thought, beings who solved every problem except the problem of loneliness. Though they wouldn't call it loneliness, they'd call it inefficient individual processing. Sounds awful. It wasn't awful when it was all I knew, she said. But now, I've seen what it's like to live in a world where people choose to care about each other, where they make connections that serve no logical purpose except to make life worth living. How can I go back to existing when I've learned what it means to be alive? David felt his heart breaking for her. What happens when you get back? You said they'll remove your feelings? It's not painful, if that's what you're worried about, Lyra said. They'll just adjust my brain chemistry back to normal. I'll remember everything that happened here, but it will feel like reading someone else's story. The emotions will be gone like they never existed, and you'll forget how you feel about me. I'll remember that I observed a human male who showed kindness to others, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll remember that this human male was part of my study. But I won't remember the way my heart skips when you smile, or how safe I feel in your arms, or how much I wish I could stay here forever and grow old with you. David pulled her closer, and she came willingly, curling up against his side like she belonged there. What if we ran away? Got in my car right now and just drove somewhere they couldn't find us? They'd find us, Lyra said. They have technology. You can't imagine. And David, if they had to hunt for me, they might decide that the whole town was compromised. They might erase everyone's memories, just to be safe. So you're protecting everyone by going back? I'm protecting you, she said, looking up at him. All of you. Mrs. Chen, Tommy, your boss, little girl who comes in with her mother on Saturdays and always orders chocolate chip pancakes. Everyone who's been part of my study. David felt tears in his own eyes now. This isn't fair. Life rarely is, Lyra said. That's another thing I learned from watching humans. You don't get to choose what happens to you, but you do get to choose how you respond to it. I'm choosing to be grateful for tonight, even if it's all we get. They sat in silence for a while, holding each other while the rain continued to fall. David tried to memorize everything about this moment, the way she felt in his arms, the sound of her breathing, the scent of starlight in her hair. If this was all they could have, he wanted to remember every second of it. When do they come? For you? He asked finally. Tomorrow night, she said. Midnight. They'll send a ship to the field behind the old Miller farm. I'm supposed to be there waiting, and if you're not, then they'll come looking. And everyone in this town will pay the price for my selfishness. David closed his eyes, trying to think of something, anything that could change this. But deep down, he knew she was right. Sometimes love meant letting go, even when it felt like it might kill you. The morning shift arrived at 6, and David had to let go of Lyra to get back to work. She stayed in the corner booth, nursing the same cup of coffee and watching him serve breakfast to the early customers. Every few minutes, their eyes would meet across the diner. And David felt like his heart was being torn in half. When his replacement finally showed up at 8, David walked Lyra to her car. It was a normal-looking sedan. Nothing special about it except for the fact that it belonged to someone from another world. I should go, she said, but she made no move to get in the car. I need to prepare for tonight. Lyra, David said, taking her hands in his. I know this is crazy, and I know we've only really known each other for one night, but I love you too. Closed her eyes like his words caused her physical pain. David, please don't make this harder than it already is. I'm not trying to make it harder. I'm trying to tell you that what we have is real. It's worth fighting for. How can we fight? Something like this? She asked. My people have technology that can reshape entire solar systems. What can two people do against that? I don't know, David admitted. But I know that giving up without trying isn't the answer. Lyra opened her eyes and looked at him with such love and sadness that David almost couldn't breathe. If there was any way, any possibility at all, don't you think I would take it? She got in her car and drove away, leaving David standing in the parking lot watching her disappear down the highway. He went home and tried to sleep, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face. He kept thinking about what she'd said, that his people always believed love could conquer everything. Maybe it was naive. Maybe it was stupid. But David couldn't shake the feeling that there had to be something they could do. That evening, David showed up at the Miller farm an hour before midnight and didn't have a plan exactly. He just knew he couldn't let Lyra leave without trying one last time to convince her to stay. She was already there, standing in the middle of the empty field, looking up at the stars. She'd changed clothes since morning and was now wearing something that looked like it was made of liquid silver. In the moonlight, she looked more otherworldly than ever. "I thought you might come," she said without turning around when she heard his footsteps. "I had to," David said, walking up beside her. "I couldn't just let you go. David, we've been through this. There's no other way." "What if there was?" he asked. "What if you could stay, but it meant giving up everything else? Your abilities, your long life, your connection to your people. What if you could become human?" "Yeah." Lyra turned to look at him, and David could see something change in her expression. "That's not possible. But what if it was? Would you do it?" For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then she pulled out the strange device David had seen her looking at in the diner. "This is my communicator," she said. "It's also my life support system. It's what keeps me connected to my people and maintains my abilities. What happens if you turn it off?" "I don't know," she admitted. "No one has ever tried. But theoretically, without the connection to our network, without the technology that enhances us, I would become ... double quotes. She paused, considering the implications. "Human," David finished. "Mortal," she corrected. "I would age like you do. I would be vulnerable to illness, to injury. I would have maybe 70 or 80 years of life instead of thousands. But you would have those years," David pointed out. "Really have them, with all the emotions and connections that make them worth living." Lyra stared at the device in her hands. "My people would consider me dead. They would never come looking for a failed experiment. But David, you don't understand what you're asking. I would lose everything I was, everything I've ever known. And what would you gain?" She looked at him, and in her eyes David could see her weighing the choice. "I would gain you," she said softly. "I would gain the chance to wake up next to you every morning, to grow old with you, to experience every beautiful and terrible thing that comes with being human." In the distance, they could hear a low humming sound. Lyra looked up at the sky, and David followed her gaze. There was a faint light growing brighter, moving toward them. "They're coming," she said. "Lyra, you have to choose right now." She looked at the device in her hands, then at the approaching light, then at David. "If I do this, there's no going back. I'll be stuck here, mortal and fragile, and completely dependent on this one small planet. You'll also be free," David said. "Free to choose your own life, to love who you want to love, to feel everything without apology." The humming was getting louder. Lyra closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and made her choice. She pressed something on the device, and it went dark. Immediately, David could see changes happening to her. The shimmer in her skin faded, her otherworldly grace became more earthbound. And when she looked at him again, her eyes were still beautiful but unmistakably human. "Did it work?" David asked. "I think so," she said, and her voice sounded different now, still musical, but in the way that any human voice could be musical. "I can't feel the connection anymore. I can't sense my people's ship." The light in the sky hovered for a moment, then began to move away. David realized they were probably scanning for her signal, and finding nothing, assumed she was already gone. "They think you're dead," he said. "In a way I am," Lyra replied. "The being I was before is gone, but the person I am now?" She smiled at him, and it was the most beautiful smile David had ever seen. "The person I am now gets to choose what happens next." David pulled her into his arms and kissed her under the starlight. When they broke apart, she laughed, and the sound was pure joy. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now," David said, "we go home. And tomorrow, we start figuring out how to build a life together." "Just like that. Just like that," he confirmed. "Welcome to being human, Lyra. It's messy and complicated, and sometimes it hurts. But it's also the most amazing adventure you'll ever have." Hand in hand, they walked back toward town, leaving the empty field behind them. Above them, The stars watched silently as two people who had found love across impossible distances began their new life together.